The first time anyone in Willow Hollow, Vermont noticed Eli Tanner's strange habit, it was late October, and frost had already silvered the pumpkin rows along Route 9. He was standing in Dale Kessler's back pasture, hauling a splintered, empty beehive box out of a fence line where it had sat rotting for 3 seasons. Dale watched from his porch, coffee steaming in his hand, and hollered across the field. "That thing's been dead longer than my tractor's been running, son. What in the world do you want with it?" Eli just lifted a hand in a small wave, loaded the box into his father's truck bed, alongside 4 others he'd already collected that week, and drove off without answering. He wasn't being rude. He simply didn't have an answer that would fit in a shouted sentence across a pasture. By the time the truck disappeared over the hill, 3 more farmers along the road had come out to their fences to watch, and not one of them understood what they'd just seen. If stories about quiet determination and overlooked ideas keep you watching until the very end, subscribe for more every week. And tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. Eli Tanner was 16, tall in the way boys get before they fill out, with hands already rough from farm work and a habit of studying things longer than most people had patience for. He wasn't shy, exactly. He just preferred doing to explaining. His mother liked to say he'd been born with his ears open and his mouth shut, which suited a house that ran on the rhythm of a dairy operation. Up before dawn, animals first, everything else after. The hive collecting had started almost by accident, back in August, when Eli's grandfather mentioned that half the old apple orchards near Cobb Ridge had lost their bees over the last few winters. Colonies that used to hum through spring pollination were simply gone, boxes standing empty, comb dry and crumbling, no explanation anyone could agree on. Eli didn't say much when he heard it. He just started asking around the county for hives nobody wanted anymore. Most farmers were glad to be rid of the boxes. A few thought he was collecting scrap wood for kindling. None of them guessed the truth, because Eli hadn't told anybody the truth. Not even his father knew exactly what he was aiming at, only that whatever it was, it involved a growing stack of dead boxes behind the barn, and a notebook Eli kept closed whenever someone walked in. The first person to really talk to him about it was Marguerite Doyle, a retired beekeeper who'd kept hives on Cobb Ridge for almost 40 years before her hands got too stiff for the work. Eli showed up at her farmhouse with a hive box balanced on his bike rack, and instead of knocking, he simply sat on her porch steps and waited, the way he did most things, patient, unbothered by silence. When she came out, she looked at the box, then at him, and said, "You're the boy who's been raiding the county for corpses." "Yes, ma'am." "Care to tell me why?" He hesitated, turning the question over the way he turned over everything. "I want to know why they died," he finally said. "Not just weather or mites. I mean which ones. If some hives made it through, and some didn't, right next to each other, there's a reason. I want to find the ones that almost made it." Marguerite's expression changed slowly, the way weather changes on a mountain. She invited him inside, and instead of a lecture, she handed him a frame from her own basement, old comb, dark with age. "Look at it," she said. "Don't ask me. Look." He turned it under the window light and noticed what she wanted him to notice. Rows of cells chewed open, ragged and deliberate, not the smooth pattern of a healthy brood pattern. "Something got pulled out of these," he said slowly, "on purpose." "That's a colony fighting for its life," she said, "and in this case, winning, for a while. That's what you're looking for, not the ones that gave up, the ones that fought." Eli looked down at the frame, like it had just become a different object entirely. Over the following weeks, his project changed shape. He wasn't just hauling boxes anymore. He was performing something closer to an autopsy, pulling frames, holding them to the light, hunting for that same ragged, chewed-open pattern Marguerite had shown him. Most hives gave him nothing. A few gave him exactly what he was looking for, and each time, he marked the location on a hand-drawn map tacked inside the barn door, the pins slowly forming a cluster around 3 farms on Cobb Ridge. Nobody in town knew what the pins meant. Dale caught a glimpse of the map once, delivering a part for the Tanner's baler, and stood in the doorway a full minute before Eli's father steered him back outside. "Kids basically running a crime board out there. Dale told his wife that night, half joking, half unsettled. Except instead of suspects, it's dead bees. The answer to what came next arrived through Renata Ibarra, the county's agricultural extension officer. Eli tracked her down after Marguerite mentioned that a colony which fought off disease could pass that trait to its offspring, if someone patient enough raised new queens from it. Renata was skeptical, not of the idea, but of the messenger. "You're 16, she said, looking at his pinned map and cramped handwriting. "Yes, ma'am. You know how many people spend years chasing exactly this." "I know it's slow," he said. "I've got time." She loaned him a grafting tool, a stack of diagrams, and a warning that his failure rate would be brutal. She wasn't wrong. His first attempt collapsed within 4 days, when the temperature in his makeshift Nuxe box swung too wildly overnight. His second drew ants before he'd sealed the hive stand, and he lost most of a season's work in one humid week. Dale, watching from across the fence, wasn't shy about saying what half the town thought. "Kid's been at this since summer and doesn't have a single working hive to show for it." But something had started shifting in how he said it. He'd taken to slowing his truck when he passed the Tanner place, just long enough to see what was new behind the barn. He never asked. He just looked. By early spring, something finally held. A nucleus colony built from a Cobb Ridge survivor queen made it through an unseasonable cold snap that killed 2 commercial colonies on the same property. Eli opened the box on a gray March morning and found the cluster alive, tight, and working. He didn't celebrate loudly. He wrote the date in his notebook and biked to Marguerite's house before telling anyone else. "1 hive," he said, almost apologetic, like it wasn't much. "1 hive is where all of them start," she said. What Eli didn't say, not yet, not to Marguerite, not to his father, was what he intended to do with it. He'd started sketching something in the back pages of his notebook, not just scattered nuke boxes behind the barn, but rows of them, laid out along the fence line where Dale had first watched him haul that first dead box away. A place, not just a project. He kept the sketch to himself. It wasn't ready to be seen. That summer, word moved the way it does in small towns, not through announcements, but through conversations repeated at the feed store, usually starting with, "You know that Tanner boy who was hauling dead hives around?" Orchard owners, including a still cautious Dale, started asking whether Eli might have queens to spare. 2 more commercial colonies in the area had failed that spring, and the survivor genetics Eli had spent a year gathering looked less like a teenager's odd hobby and more like something the whole valley might need. He said yes to every request, but he was quietly building something else on the side, evenings and weekends, using salvaged lumber from the very deadouts that had started it all. Nobody in Willow Hollow saw the whole picture. They saw pieces, a fence line cleared, posts going in, boxes being painted, and assumed it was just more of the same strange project. Even Dale, driving past twice a week now instead of once, couldn't quite tell what he was looking at. The reveal came the following spring, during apple bloom, when Eli sent word through Renata that anyone curious was welcome to walk the fence line behind the Tanner farm on Saturday morning. More people came than he expected. Dale was there, arms crossed, saying nothing. Marguerite came too, moving slower than she used to, leaning on a cane she hadn't needed the year before. Children from 3 farms ran ahead of their parents down the mowed path. What they found wasn't a machine or an invention. It was a long, sunlit row of hives, 11 of them, freshly painted, set against the tree line where the orchard met open pasture, each one humming with the low, steady sound of a colony at work. Beyond the hives, native wildflower strips Eli had seeded the previous fall were just beginning to bloom, planted specifically to feed the bees through the gaps between orchard blossoms. A hand-painted sign, plain and unfussy, read, "Willow Hollow Survivor Apiary, community hives available each spring." Dale walked the length of the row without saying a word, hands in his pockets, stopping at the 4th box. He crouched down, watching bees stream in and out, then looked up at Eli. "This the one from my pasture?" he asked. "The one I hollered at you about?" "That's the one," Eli said. "First box I ever pulled." Dale didn't say anything else for a moment. He just nodded, slow, the way a man nods when he's revising something he'd decided a long time ago. Marguerite stood at the end of the row, watching the bees move between hive and blossom, and said, quietly, mostly to herself, "Every one of these came from something somebody threw away." Eli stood among the hives that morning, not saying much, the way he never did, while 11 boxes, that had once been abandoned, wreckage in other people's fields, hummed steadily behind him, full, alive, and no longer anyone's mystery to solve.